Maya Rodriguez thought she was a good person until the day she discovered how wrong she could be. The morning started like any other Tuesday in her quiet suburban neighborhood. But by evening, she would question everything she believed about human nature and her own moral compass. As a behavioral psychology researcher at Northwestern University, Maya spent her days studying the intricate patterns of human decision-making. Her colleagues respected her methodical approach to understanding why people acted the way they did, especially in crisis situations. What they didn't know was that Maya carried a secret, darkness she'd been suppressing for years, violent thoughts that crept into her mind during moments of stress. Thoughts that made her wonder if she was fundamentally different from everyone else. The catalyst came during her lunch break. Maya sat in her favorite coffee shop, reviewing data from her latest study on moral decision-making, when she witnessed something that would change her life forever. A well-dressed businessman at the table next to her was berating a teenage barista for getting his order wrong. The young girl's eyes filled with tears as the man's voice grew louder and more vicious. Other customers turned away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Maya felt something shift inside her chest. The familiar darkness stirred, but this time it felt different, purposeful. She found herself studying the man's face, noting the way his jaw clenched, how his eyes narrowed with genuine pleasure at the girl's distress. This wasn't just anger. This was cruelty for its own sake. Maya recognized something in his expression that chilled her to the bone because she'd seen it before, in her own reflection during her darkest moments. Without conscious thought, Maya stood up. Her psychology training kicked in as she approached the man with calculated precision. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undertone that made him look up sharply. "I couldn't help but notice how much you're enjoying this." The man opened his mouth to respond, but Maya continued, her tone growing colder. "The way you're feeding off her fear, the satisfaction in your eyes, it's fascinating from a psychological perspective. Tell me, do you always get sexual gratification from making children cry, or is this a special occasion?" The coffee shop fell silent. Maya watched as the man's face cycled through confusion, anger, and then something close to panic as every eye in the establishment turned toward him. She had just weaponized his cruelty against him, and the precision with which she'd done it surprised even her. The man gathered his things and fled, leaving behind his untouched coffee and a room full of witnesses to his humiliation. The teenage barista looked at Maya with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. But as Maya returned to her seat, she realized something disturbing. She had enjoyed that moment far more than she should have. The rush of power, the satisfaction of seeing fear replace arrogance in his eyes. It felt intoxicating in a way that scared her. That evening, Maya sat in her home office surrounded by years of research on antisocial behavior and criminal psychology. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing, not as a researcher, but as someone trying to understand herself. "Day one of acknowledging what I might be," she wrote at the top of the page. The incident at the coffee shop had awakened something she'd spent decades suppressing. Maya had always been drawn to studying the psychology of evil because she recognized it in herself. The violent fantasies that plagued her during stressful periods, the way she could manipulate people's emotions with surgical precision, the satisfaction she derived from others' psychological pain, these weren't normal thoughts for a good person. Maya opened her laptop and began researching, something she'd avoided throughout her entire career: the psychology of high-functioning psychopaths. As she read, each symptom felt like a mirror reflecting her own hidden nature: superficial charm. She'd built her entire professional reputation on her ability to make people feel comfortable while extracting their deepest fears and motivations. Lack of empathy? She could simulate it perfectly, but genuine emotional connection had always eluded her. Manipulative behavior? She'd been doing it so naturally for so long that she'd convinced herself it was just being persuasive. The most terrifying realization came when she read about the successful psychopath, individuals who channeled their antisocial traits into socially acceptable careers. Lawyers, surgeons, CEOs, and yes, psychologists. People who could study human behavior not out of genuine care, but because understanding how others thought gave them power over them. Maya closed the laptop and stared at her reflection in the black screen. For the first time in her adult life, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she'd been running from. She wasn't studying evil to help people overcome it. She was studying it to become better at it. The question that would haunt her for the rest of this journey was no longer whether she was capable of evil. It was whether she could choose to be good despite her nature, or if that choice had already been made for her long ago. As she prepared for bed that night, Maya made a decision that would define the next chapter of her life. She would conduct an experiment on herself, documenting her own psychological patterns and moral decision-making processes. She would become both researcher and subject, studying the fine line between good and evil that ran through her own mind. What she would discover would challenge everything she thought she knew about human nature and force her to confront the most terrifying question of all. If everyone's brain is wired for evil, what separates those who resist from those who embrace it? 3 weeks after the coffee shop incident, Maya had transformed her home study into a makeshift laboratory for the most dangerous experiment of her career. She installed hidden cameras, began recording daily audio logs, and created detailed psychological profiles of everyone in her immediate social circle. What started as self-analysis had evolved into something far more sinister: systematic study of how to manipulate human behavior without detection. Her first real test subject was her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, a lonely widow who spent most of her days tending to her garden and watching for any excuse to start a conversation. Maya had always found the woman's desperate need for social connection pathetic, but now she saw it as an opportunity. Over the course of a week, Maya carefully planted seeds of paranoia about another neighbor, Mr. Chun, who had recently moved in across the street. "I noticed Mr. Chun watching your house again yesterday," Maya mentioned casually during one of their fence-line conversations. "He was taking pictures with his phone." Probably nothing, but with all these break-ins in the neighborhood lately. She let the sentence trail off, watching as Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened with concern. Maya documented every micro-expression, every nervous gesture, every question Mrs. Patterson asked in the days that followed. Within 2 weeks, the elderly woman had installed 3 new security cameras, started keeping her curtains drawn, and had called the police twice to report suspicious behavior from the completely innocent Mr. Chen. Maya felt a familiar rush of satisfaction as she watched her experiment unfold perfectly. But the real breakthrough came during her session with Dr. Williams, her department head, who had been pressuring her to speed up her research timeline. Maya had always suspected that Williams took credit for his graduate students' work, and she decided to test just how far his narcissism would allow him to be manipulated. During their weekly meeting, Maya presented a deliberately flawed research proposal, one with obvious ethical violations that any competent psychologist should immediately flag. Instead of correcting her, Dr. Williams praised the innovative approach and began suggesting ways to implement it faster. Maya realized she was watching a man's moral compass, completely shut down when presented with the possibility of academic recognition. "The beauty of this design," Williams said, leaning back in his chair with obvious pride, "is that the subjects will never know they're being manipulated. We could gather unprecedented data on involuntary behavioral responses." Maya nodded along, secretly recording every word, while internally marveling at how easy it was to corrupt someone who believed themselves to be ethical. That night, Maya reviewed her recordings with growing excitement. She was discovering that evil wasn't some mysterious force that possessed people. It was a choice that became easier each time it was made. Every person she'd studied had a breaking point where their moral boundaries dissolved, and she was becoming exceptionally good at finding those pressure points. Her most disturbing revelation came during an interaction with her younger sister Claire, who called seeking advice about her failing marriage. Claire had always been the good daughter, the one who helped at soup kitchens, rescued stray animals, and saw the best in everyone. Maya found herself curious about whether she could corrupt someone so fundamentally decent. "You know what your problem is, Claire?" Maya said, her voice taking on the therapeutic tone she'd perfected over years of practice. "You're too trusting. David is probably having an affair, and you're sitting there making excuses for him." This wasn't based on any evidence. Maya had planted the seed purely to see how her sister would respond to suspicion. Over the following days, Maya fed Claire a steady diet of relationship paranoia disguised as sisterly concern. She suggested checking David's phone, questioned innocent explanations for his late nights at work, and gradually convinced her sister that her husband was betraying her. Maya watched with fascination as Claire's natural kindness began to curdle into something ugly and suspicious. The experiment reached its climax when Claire called Maya, sobbing, to report that she'd hired a private investigator to follow David. "I can't believe I'm doing this," Claire cried. "This isn't who I am. But I can't shake the feeling that you're right about him cheating." Maya stared at her reflection in her office window as she listened to her sister's breakdown. She had successfully corrupted someone she'd once believed to be incorruptible, and the process had been remarkably simple. All it took was consistent pressure on the right psychological vulnerabilities delivered by someone Claire trusted. But as Maya hung up the phone, something unexpected happened. For the first time since beginning her experiment, she felt something that might have been guilt. Not for what she'd done to Mrs. Patterson or Dr. Williams. They had been willing participants in their own manipulation. But Claire was different. Claire had genuinely trusted her, and Maya had weaponized that trust for no reason other than scientific curiosity. Maya opened her laptop and began typing her daily log entry. Day 23 of the experiment. Today I learned that the capacity for evil isn't just about having dark impulses, it's about the complete absence of meaningful resistance to those impulses. Every subject I've studied, including myself, had the choice to say no. The only difference is that some people have stronger barriers between thought and action. She paused, staring at the cursor blinking after her last sentence. Maya realized she was approaching a point of no return in her own psychological development. Each successful manipulation made the next one easier. Each boundary crossed made the next violation feel less significant. She was documenting her own transformation from someone who studied evil to someone who practiced it. The question that kept her awake that night wasn't whether she could continue the experiment. She knew she would. The question was whether she wanted to stop herself before she went too far, or if she was already past the point where stopping was possible. Maya had always wondered what it felt like to choose evil over good. Now she was learning that most of the time it didn't feel like choosing at all. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. As she prepared for sleep, Maya made a note to call Claire in the morning. Not to confess, but to see how much further she could push her sister before something irreversible happened. The scientist in her was curious. The human in her was already gone. 6 weeks into her self-experiment, Maya discovered that studying evil had an unexpected side effect. It made her incredibly good at recognizing it in others. What she found lurking beneath the surface of her seemingly normal community would shatter any remaining illusions about human nature and force her to confront the most unsettling truth of all. She wasn't unique. The revelation began with her mailman, Pete, whose cheerful morning greetings had always seemed genuine. Maya started paying closer attention to his micro-expressions and body language during their brief interactions. What she noticed made her skin crawl. Pete's smile never reached his eyes when he looked at her female neighbors, but it became genuinely animated when he talked about the teenage girl who lived 3 houses down. His questions about the girl's schedule when she got home from school and whether her parents were usually home suddenly took on a sinister context that Maya couldn't ignore. Maya began following Pete's route, staying far enough back to avoid detection. Her suspicions were confirmed when she watched him spend extra time at the teenager's house, taking pictures of mail that required no photography, and peering into windows under the pretense of checking for package delivery locations. She realized she was witnessing predatory behavior in its early stages, and the most disturbing part was how easy it had been to identify once she knew what to look for. Her enhanced ability to spot deception led to a string of uncomfortable discoveries. Dr. Williams, her department head, wasn't just taking credit for student work, he was sexually harassing graduate students and using his position to coerce them into compromising situations. Maya observed him during department meetings, noting how his attention lingered on younger female students, how he found excuses to touch their shoulders, and how he used academic threats disguised as mentorship. The grocery store manager, who everyone praised for his community involvement, was embezzling money from the charity drives he organized. Maya caught him in several lies about donation totals and noticed his lifestyle was incompatible with his stated salary. Her neighbor across the street, who volunteered at an animal shelter, had been stealing and reselling medications meant for sick animals. The local politician, who campaigned on family values, was running a sophisticated tax evasion scheme that diverted money from public school programs. Each discovery confirmed what Maya's research had been telling her all along: evil wasn't an aberration. It was the norm. The only difference was that most people were better at hiding it than others, and society had created elaborate systems of plausible deniability that allowed them to maintain their self-image as good people while engaging in fundamentally corrupt behavior. But Maya's most shocking discovery came when she turned her enhanced perception toward her own family. Her mother, whom she'd always admired for her charity work and community involvement, was systematically poisoning Maya's relationship with her father. During what seemed like innocent phone calls, her mother would plant seeds of doubt about her father's health, his mental state, and his ability to manage his own affairs. Maya realized she was watching her mother orchestrate a slow-motion elder abuse scheme designed to gain control of her father's finances. The pattern became clear once Maya started recording their family phone calls. Her mother would ask leading questions about her father's forgetfulness, suggest that he might be developing dementia, and encourage Maya to consider taking over his financial decisions for his own protection. When Maya visited her parents' house unannounced, she found her father sharp, alert, and completely competent, nothing like the confused elderly man her mother had been describing. Maya confronted her mother during what appeared to be a casual lunch meeting. "I've been thinking about what you said about Dad's memory problems," Maya said, watching her mother's face carefully. "But when I see him, he seems completely fine. Maybe you're seeing things that aren't there, or maybe you want to see them because they serve your purpose." Her mother's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Your father is getting older, Maya. Someone needs to look out for his best interests." But Maya caught the micro-expression of satisfaction that flickered across her mother's face, and she knew she was right. That evening, Maya sat in her office staring at the wall of evidence she'd accumulated over 6 weeks. Photos, audio recordings, behavioral analysis charts, and detailed psychological profiles painted a picture of a community where evil wasn't the exception. It was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Every institution, every relationship, every social interaction was corrupted by people pursuing their own selfish interests at the expense of others. The most terrifying realization was how normal they all seemed. Pete delivered mail with a smile. Dr. Williams published respected research. Her mother organized bake sales for charity. None of them looked like monsters because they weren't monsters in the traditional sense. They were ordinary people who had made a series of small compromises with their moral principles, until those principles became completely meaningless. Two months into her experiment, Maya faced a decision that would define not just her research, but her soul. Her sister Claire had taken Maya's manipulative advice too far, hiring not just a private investigator, but also planning to plant drugs in David's car to destroy his career and ensure she won their divorce. Maya realized she had created a monster, and now she had to decide whether to save her sister's marriage or let her own creation destroy an innocent man's life. The phone call came at 3 in the morning. Claire's voice was shaking with a combination of rage and excitement that Maya had never heard before. "I found cocaine in his gym bag," Claire whispered. "I know he doesn't use drugs, Maya. Someone must have planted it there. But you know what? I don't care. I'm calling his boss in the morning and then his parole officer. David works with children. This will end everything for him." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She knew Claire was lying. The private investigator Maya had recommended was actually a con artist who specialized in manufacturing evidence for bitter divorces. Maya had known this when she gave Claire his contact information, curious to see if her fundamentally good sister would cross the line into fabricating evidence against her innocent husband. "Claire, wait," Maya said, her voice carefully measured. "Are you absolutely certain about what you found? Because once you make this call, there's no going back. David's life will be destroyed, and if you're wrong..." Maya let the sentence hang, not because she cared about David, but because she was fascinated by the psychological process she was witnessing. Claire's laugh was bitter and unfamiliar. "I don't care if I'm wrong. He made me feel crazy for months, staying late at work, being secretive with his phone. Even if he's not cheating, he deserves this for putting me through hell." Maya realized she was listening to her sister rationalize destroying an innocent person's life, and the transformation was beautiful in its completeness. But Maya's fascination was interrupted by an unexpected emotion, something that might have been protective instinct. Not for David, whom she'd never met, but for Claire herself. Maya realized that once her sister crossed this line, there would be no coming back. Claire would become someone who could justify any cruelty if it served her emotional needs. And Maya had created that monster through systematic psychological manipulation. The next morning, Maya made a decision that surprised even her. She drove to Claire's house and let herself in with the spare key she'd kept since college. Claire was sitting at her kitchen table with her phone in hand, prepared to make the call that would destroy David's life and complete her own moral transformation. "Put the phone down," Maya said quietly. Claire looked up, startled by the tone in her sister's voice. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." What followed was the most honest conversation Maya had ever had with another human being. She told Claire about her experiment, about the private investigator's true nature, about the systematic way she'd manipulated her sister's fears and insecurities. She explained how she'd planted every seed of doubt, fed every paranoia, and guided Claire toward this moment of moral destruction. Claire stared at her sister with growing horror and disbelief. "You're lying," she whispered. "You wouldn't do that to me. You love me." But Maya could see the recognition dawning in Claire's eyes as the pieces fell into place. Every perfectly timed phone call, every seemingly innocent question, every piece of advice that had led her further down this dark path. "I did it because I wanted to see if goodness was real or just a comfortable illusion," Maya said. "I wanted to know if someone like you, someone I genuinely believed was incapable of evil, could be corrupted. The answer is yes. Anyone can be broken down and rebuilt into something cruel, given the right pressure and the right guidance." Claire began crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. "You destroyed my marriage," she screamed. "You made me suspect my husband, made me hire that man, made me plant evidence. You turned me into this." Maya watched with clinical interest as her sister cycled through denial, anger, and bargaining in real time. "No," Maya said calmly. "I gave you suggestions. You made every choice. I didn't force you to hire the investigator, to plant the drugs, or to plan David's destruction. I simply showed you that these were options, and you chose them because they felt good in the moment. That's what evil is, choosing what feels good over what is right." Maya pulled out her phone and showed Claire the recordings she'd made of their conversations over the past 2 months. "This is what corruption looks like from the inside. It doesn't feel like becoming evil. It feels like finally seeing the world clearly and making rational decisions based on that clarity. You started as a good person, but goodness was never your natural state. It was a performance you maintained because it served your self-image. Claire looked at the phone, then at her sister, then at the planted evidence on her kitchen table. Maya could see the exact moment when her sister faced the same choice Maya had confronted months earlier: accept responsibility for her actions and try to rebuild her moral foundation, or embrace what she'd become and continue down the path of rationalized cruelty. "What am I supposed to do now?" Claire asked, her voice barely audible. Maya realized this was the most important moment of her entire experiment. She had successfully corrupted someone she loved, documented the process, and now she had the power to guide her sister toward redemption or damnation. "You have two choices," Maya said. "You can call David right now, confess everything, seek counseling together, and spend the rest of your life rebuilding the trust you destroyed. Or you can make that call to his boss, destroy an innocent man to protect your pride, and become someone who can live with that choice." Maya stood up to leave, but turned back at the kitchen door. "The choice you make in the next 5 minutes will determine who you are for the rest of your life. Choose carefully, because there's no coming back from either decision." As Maya drove home, she realized she had just conducted the most important part of her experiment. She had given her sister the same choice she faced every day, the choice between acknowledging her capacity for evil and fighting against it, or embracing that capacity and becoming someone who could rationalize any cruelty. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Claire. "I called David. We're going to counseling. I don't know if I can forgive you, but thank you for stopping me." Maya stared at the message, feeling something she hadn't experienced in months, the possibility that redemption might still be possible, even for someone like her. 3 months after beginning her experiment, Maya stood before a bathroom mirror at 2 a.m., finally understanding the terrifying truth about human nature that her research had revealed. The revelation wasn't that people were capable of evil. It was that evil was the default setting, and goodness was nothing more than a temporary override that required constant energy to maintain. More importantly, she realized that her experiment had been designed from the beginning to fail, because she had already chosen her side long before she started documenting her choices. The final piece of the puzzle came when Maya received a call from the university's ethics board. Someone had anonymously reported Dr. Williams for sexual harassment, providing detailed evidence of his predatory behavior toward graduate students. As Maya listened to the board member describe the evidence, she realized it was her own documentation, but she hadn't submitted it. Someone else had accessed her research files and used her work to destroy Williams' career. Maya's first suspect was Claire, seeking revenge for the psychological manipulation. But when she checked her home security system, she discovered the truth was far more disturbing. The break-in had been conducted by Pete, the mailman whose predatory behavior she'd been documenting. But Pete hadn't just stolen her research on Williams. He had copied everything, including her detailed psychological profiles of every person in the neighborhood. Maya realized she was looking at a predator who was far more sophisticated than she had initially understood. Pete hadn't been randomly targeting the teenage girl down the street. He had been systematically studying every household in the neighborhood, learning their routines, their vulnerabilities, and their secrets. Maya's search had given him a treasure trove of information about how to manipulate and exploit her neighbors, and she had unknowingly become his accomplice. But Pete's theft revealed something even more unsettling about Maya's own nature. As she reviewed her stolen files, she realized that her documentation had been far more detailed and invasive than necessary for any legitimate psychological research. She had recorded private phone conversations, photographed people without their consent, and compiled psychological profiles that read more like stalker manifestos than scientific observations. Maya was forced to confront the possibility that her experiment had never been about understanding evil. It had been about perfecting it. Every manipulation she had rationalized as research, every boundary she had crossed in the name of science, had been steps in her own transformation from someone who studied predatory behavior to someone who practiced it. The real revelation came when Maya discovered Pete's real identity through a background check she probably should have run months earlier. Pete Morrison wasn't just a mailman with predatory tendencies. He was a registered sex offender who had been using his postal route to case potential victims for over 3 years. Maya had been studying a genuine predator while becoming one herself, and she hadn't been able to tell the difference because they were operating from the same psychological playbook. Maya printed out all of Pete's information and sat staring at it in her office. She could call the police, report his parole violations, and probably prevent him from harming the teenage girl he'd been targeting. But doing so would require explaining how she had obtained the information, which would expose her own illegal surveillance activities and destroy her career. As Maya weighed her options, she realized she was facing the same moral choice she had presented to Claire weeks earlier. She could sacrifice her own interests to protect potential victims, or she could protect herself and become complicit in whatever Pete did next. The difference was that Maya understood exactly what choice she was making and why. Maya picked up her phone and dialed 911, but instead of reporting Pete, she found herself hanging up before the call connected. She tried again and hung up again. On the third attempt, she let the call go through. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. Maya took a deep breath and made her choice. I need to report a registered sex offender who's been violating his parole conditions, she said. As she provided Pete's information and described his behavior, Maya realized she was choosing to be good, not because it came naturally, but because it was harder than being evil, and she wanted to prove to herself that she could still make difficult choices. The arrest happened 2 days later. Maya watched from her window as police took Pete away in handcuffs. They also confiscated several computers and boxes of evidence from his apartment, including printed copies of Maya's stolen research. A detective knocked on Maya's door that evening to ask about the theft of her files. We found extensive documentation of your neighbor's personal information in the suspect's possession, Detective Rodriguez said. We need to understand what kind of research you were conducting and why he might have targeted your work. Maya realized she was about to face consequences for her own predatory behavior, disguised as scientific research. Maya made another choice. She told Detective Rodriguez the truth about her experiment, accepting responsibility for crossing ethical and legal boundaries in pursuit of her research. She provided copies of all her documentation, explained her methodology, and submitted to questioning about her own psychological state during the experiment. The consequences were swift and severe. Maya lost her job at the university, faced potential criminal charges for invasion of privacy, and was required to undergo psychological evaluation and counseling. But as she sat in her first therapy session, describing her experiment to Dr. Sarah Chen, Maya realized something profound about the nature of her journey. "The most interesting thing about your experiment," Dr. Chen observed, "isn't what you discovered about other people's capacity for evil. It's that you documented your own transformation and then chose to reverse it. You proved that evil might be the default setting, but goodness is still possible for people who are willing to pay the price." Maya nodded, understanding for the first time that her experiment had succeeded beyond her original hypothesis. She had proven that human beings are naturally inclined toward selfishness, cruelty, and moral compromise. But she had also proven that this inclination could be recognized, studied, and ultimately resisted by people who were willing to accept the cost of choosing good over easy. As Maya walked out of Dr. Chun's office, she realized that her real research was just beginning. Understanding evil was important, but learning how to choose good despite that understanding, that was the work of a lifetime. Maya pulled out her phone and called Claire, ready to begin the hard work of rebuilding the relationships her experiment had damaged. "Claire, it's Maya. I know you may not want to talk to me, but I wanted you to know that I've learned something important about goodness. It's not about being naturally good. It's about choosing good over and over again, even when evil would be easier. I'm hoping we can learn how to do that together." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Claire's voice, still hurt but carrying a note of hope. "I'd like that, Maya. I'd really like that. The truth about human nature is more complex and disturbing than most people realize, but understanding it might be the key to becoming truly good people." If this story made you think differently about the psychology of evil and the nature of moral choice, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe for more deep psychological explorations that challenge everything you think you know about human behavior. And let me know in the comments. Do you think Maya made the right choice in the end? What would you have done in her situation?